Good after morning. What's happening? We are here to kick it. We at Third Space, right? You already know I talk about Third Space a lot. I'm Sean, right? This is Rabbi Jessy Dressin. What's happening? Tell them what we doing.
We are, well, what are we doing here?
Okay, yeah.
Well, right now we are sort of seeding my original dream as a young child to be a radio DJ.
Okay.
My dad in the 80s worked in radio, and I swore that I was going to be a radio DJ, and then someone told me radio was dying. And then they told me that if I wanted to have a radio show, it was going to have to be a podcast.
Absolutely.
And I'm just deciding that even though this will be billed as a podcast, that we are officially launching a radio show.
Let's do it. Radio show.
That I would like to call Kick It and Kibbitz.
Okay.
The idea is that we're going to rap about stuff. Kibbitz is this idea in Yiddish that people sit around and they talk to each other. Absolutely. And they sort of, shoot the S. And that's what Kick It is too. And Absolutely. We're sitting in this 100-year-old synagogue in West Baltimore.
Yes.
We're at the corner of Ockentrawley Terrace and Liberty Heights, which
it's a wonderful place to be.
Entire story of Jewish Baltimore, of relationships around migration, Absolutely. White flight, other things sort of have moved through this intersection.
Absolutely.
And my own Jewish story sort of has some cross-section with growing up as the child of two New York Jews in a place where there weren't a lot of Jews, Absolutely. Living next door to a youth advisor of the Black Baptist Church, and feeling like most of my identity around like rapping with folks is in this space of Kick It and Kibbitz.
That's kind of how we connected, though.
That is true.
Right? It was just that conversation about, I think it was the understanding of spirituality, right? You was the first person that I ever kind of talked. First of all, you was kind of one of the first rabbis that I had a personal conversation with. But the way that you understood spirituality was really kind of dope. But then also you could tie it into hip hop, and that's what made it even cooler. Because I was like, yo, I feel like you grew up with us. You dig?
I do dig. I think. Look, let's back up a second and talk a little bit about who you are, who I am, and why. About 3 years ago, I was like, you're going to help me bring Kick It and Kibbitz to life, because that's what we're going to do. So I am technically Rabbi Jessy Dressin and the executive director of Third Space at Shaarei Tfiloh, which is a new initiative in Baltimore to lean on Jewish tradition, to activate places where people speak to each other and where they learn from each other, and we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, while also imagining what does Jewish tradition and other ancestral wisdom have to say about how we might live in the world today. Absolutely. So that's me.
Okay.
I met you during the lovely days of COVID.
Absolutely.
When people met each other online.
It was during the month of Elul specifically. Which
is what?
It's a month where we reflect on stories. Right, I don't want to mess it up, right? But we reflect on stories, and every day during the month of Elul, it's proper to hear the shofar blow, right? And that's like a signal to all of, all of us, right? To kind of come back to each other and share in conversation, right?
Yeah, so Elul, you're right, is the last month on the Hebrew calendar. It's the month that leads up to the Jewish New Year, which is Rosh Hashanah.
Absolutely.
A lot of people think that your planning and your spiritual preparation for the Jewish New Year happens in the first 10 days of the year, Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. But those of us who know and speak to the rhythm of Jewish time know that actually the month leading up is when we're supposed to start to explore and reflect what was good this year, where did I miss the mark, what is my intentions for the year ahead. So when we show up either in the synagogue or wherever we show up on Rosh Hashanah, we're not thinking about it for the first time. We're ready to lean into it. So
Absolutely.
During COVID, that's right, there was this program where different rabbis from the community got to teach. And there was about 15 people on the call that morning. And I taught the Torah of Black Alicious, which is one of my favorite hip hop groups.
Incredible.
The text says, because you can choose to say good morning, God, or good God morning, which both reinforces the choose your own adventure nature
Absolutely.
of what it means to live in the world, and also is some of like the greatest Torah I've ever heard. It just happened to be shared by two Muslim dudes, one of whom is no longer living, of blessed memory, Black Alicious, and to the gift of Gab. But I have always felt like there is both like the sort of technical framework of this is Torah, Torah being like Jewish wisdom, that if there was capital and lowercase letters in Hebrew, which there's not, the Torah with a capital T would be like the 5 books of Moses.
Absolutely, I dig it.
And then the next step out would be like all the generations and millennia of commentary.
That has happened.
But I live in a world, and my own Jewish journey has been one, in which sometimes the Torah of our lives comes from a hip-hop group or a jam band or a poet. And so I presented my Torah that morning, and you were up there in the video chat, sort of. I could tell you were digging on it.
Incredible.
It is the beginning of a beautiful friendship that has been important on both of our Jewish journeys.
And like during that day, right? Like after it happened, I said, okay, well, I can't believe that she tied hip hop to like the understanding of this liturgy, right? And that to me, that's what I typically like to do to people, right? Like I like to just walk around and just talk about kind of life, because life happens, and life is what makes the understanding of scripture, in my opinion. And that day, you kind of gave it to, I was like, okay, I'm at home in Jewish Baltimore right now. But then that night or that afternoon, somebody asked you if you knew me.
Well, and I joke that they asked if I knew you because the assumption is I know all the Black Jews.
Absolutely.
And which I don't. But I had actually reached out to your rabbi.
Absolutely.
Because I heard that you were maybe connected to a specific synagogue.
Absolutely.
And your rabbi happens to be a good friend of mine. And then I really had the joy and honor of not just becoming your friend, but becoming one of your rabbis. And you've become one of my chavrutas, somebody I learn with. And
Absolutely.
It's really been at the intersection of rich Jewish wisdom and expansive hip-hop lyrics, the things we find out in the world that sort of double down on, the values that shape us, how we want to be in the world. If we're doing it right, the real challenging conversations and situations of our time. And not only we built a whole relationship around it, but now we got this building and we got this project called Third Space. And I mean, you were definitely one of the first people that I called.
Fresh out your imagination, though. That's what I always vibe with. The day that the ribbon cutting happened at Third Space, right? And talking to your parents, and they were like, this was her imagination, and seeing it come to fruition is a beautiful thing. I feel blessed for you allowing me to be part of that, right? Because it just was, it's radical to think that you could take a old synagogue and make it into a very comfortable space for people who just want to come and kick it, right? Or people who just want to come and learn, right? It's like the Beit Midrash of the future, right? Beit Midrash being a house of learning. So that's just, I feel like, like I said, I'm thankful for being a part of the thought space for it. But this is dope. And that though, right, that intersection of learning and real strenuous education, right, but also with the hip hop, the musical lens, that is why I Kick It and Kibbitz, right? Yeah,
well, and it's interesting because there's something that's potentially ironic or dissonant about, Kick It, Kibbitz implies it's kind of loose and free flowing. But I think it's a misnomer to think that it doesn't mean that we also get into it and talk about it.
Absolutely.
And I think that one of the reasons that as a white Jewish girl growing up in Virginia, I was really drawn to rap in the 80s and 90s is because I heard a story being told and I heard people sort of reflecting on their identity, and I was really drawn to it. Plus the rhythm and the bass didn't hurt the ability to hear the message. But I've thought a lot about that. And what's so interesting is Shaarei Tfiloh sits in the Mondawmin neighborhood. This was one of the central areas where Jews gathered when Jews lived in Baltimore City, when our grandparents and great-grandparents' generation, my grandparents didn't come to Jewish Baltimore, and I know yours didn't either. Yeah. But, at least as we sort of fall into the narrative of being part of Jewish Baltimore today, And then a lot of those folks moved up Park Heights and they moved up Reisterstown Road.
Absolutely.
And now we sit in this neighborhood where there's actually, there are Jews here, but the Jews who used to depend on Shaarei Tfiloh as an Orthodox synagogue, which means they needed to live in walking distance so that they could walk here on Shabbat and stuff like that. That's not who lives here now. So one of the things, you know, thanks to my parents who sort of, you know, I'm their kid, so they celebrate it that way. There was some serendipity, there was some strategy here, but when I had the opportunity to imagine what would third space at Shaarei Tfiloh be and why third space, what does that even mean? I said to the folks who were in the earliest conversations, like, we're sitting in a neighborhood that is predominantly a black neighborhood. Most of those folks are not Jewish themselves. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to open up this building, which is, by the way, iconic. It's like, dope. If you don't even know where we're sitting, you would if we told you from the outside where we're sitting. Like, how can we leverage this place as an intersection that has so much history in Baltimore City, in Jewish Baltimore, in Black Baltimore, absolutely, and really leverage it for what it could be over the course of the next 100 years, which is gonna, one, look different than it was in the past. Mm-hmm. It's going to attract different people, and the truth of the matter is there need to be spaces for Jews who fall into that category of spiritual but not religious, or, absolutely, you know, praying is not my go-to motif, or, by the way, outside of the traditionally observant space, a lot of people don't know what a Beit Midrash is.
That's it.
And I want everyone to know what a Beit Midrash is. So, you know, what is a Beit Midrash? Stay tuned. But a place where people learn, a place where people debate, a place where we encounter different ideas. And one of the things I always think about is like rules for the trade is like, you debate ideas but not people. And I feel like we're living in a time where we sort of like have conflated the two. And, you know, I've said to you, like, I want to have a conversation about cancel culture and Michael Jackson as, like, one of our future conversations. But, like, what does it mean to wrestle with that, which is either differently understood now than it was in the past, or maybe is not the most becoming parts of what it means to be part of Jewish tradition in our cases. And instead of just to, like, sort of put our hands over our ears and pretend it doesn't exist, to actually be like, there it is, and we have to wrestle with it. And so I've been thinking a lot about that as what we can do in this space and in these conversations.
Well, I think because that's what we do, like, just in our space, right? I think because when people see us, right, and we get along a lot, right, I think they don't know that sometimes we disagree, right, but we are forced to kind of understand the other person's point, right? But that's where the beauty happens, right? Growth happens in those tight spaces. I'm happy that there is a place of learning here in, like, it's located in one of the best neighborhood, like the most historical black portions of Baltimore. I'm meeting the neighbors and they telling me about activists who lived across the street and down the road, and
right, Dr. King slept over somewhere on this road.
That's incredible to have that energy just being in the space. And this is scientifically, for me speaking, right, I know energy can be created. It can't be destroyed, but it can only change forms, right? So to have an imprint of Dr. King's energy in this space, right, and then all of these learned folks that have passed through this building at some point, right, like, why would we, I don't understand how we could, well, I understand how we could have let it go to the wayside, but I definitely appreciate you for, like, leaning in and, like, wanting to make this a space where we could come in and have those conversations. Because what's greater than a conversation that can at least open the mind of another person?
But, you know, it's an interesting time to sort of ask the question, like, what is third space and what is a third place?
Absolutely.
Because it's nice to have a place like that, but it is sometimes, I think, counterintuitive to the way we're nurtured right now. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we kid ourselves into thinking, well, I don't need to go that route. Right. I will just cross the street when this, you know, weird black dude with this neon yellow kippah on his head walks my way. You know, like, I feel like Jewish tradition has offered, and the Beit Midrash specifically has offered a framework for vehement disagreement and debate that requires understanding the argument of your opponent, that requires intellectual curiosity, regardless of how it makes you feel. Absolutely. And also requires us to distinguish between these ideas of moments where we feel uncomfortable where we are inclined often to sort of quickly conclude we're unsafe.
Absolutely.
And I'm like a white girl saying that to a black man. So I just like want to acknowledge that like it's not that our feelings and our emotions don't matter, but the Beit Midrash has always afforded this place where we are allowed to really lean in, but there's rules for how to engage.
Absolutely.
And I think those rules are really important. Now, a third space or a third place, you know, Lou, our events and admin person, just told me this morning that they got a message from someone that said, "I don't like your name," which, by the way, I think is the first on record. I don't like the name because a lot of people have shared that they really do like the name. But I love that we got that call, and I didn't even ask for demographics of who it was from. But so in the 90s, sociologist in the UK, Ray Oldenburg, put forth this idea that healthy societies require three places where people primarily build relationships. The first is your home or your private dwelling places. The second is the place of contribution or productivity.
Okay.
Your school, your work, your trade, the place where you sort of like are incentivized to show up, and the metrics of your contribution are probably a little bit more quantitative than that require a mitigator to that quantitative emphasis, which is the third place. And a third place are places where people who are proximate to one another by geography, by common coffee interest, by finding each other in this specific book section of the bookstore will come into relationship with one another simply because they find themselves sort of circling back and becoming to recognize one another. That could be a park bench, that could be a library, that could be our house down the street, right? Remington House, not my house, that would be a first place. But the thing that I keep thinking about, and that was the critique of the sociologist when I read this book, The Great Good Place, as part of my rabbinic thesis, was we don't have enough third places.
Okay.
And it's interesting because I've always wondered, like, is a synagogue where you pay dues a third place? Because even though it is like a public and open place, most people who show up in those places are dues paying members, or they're part of like an insider group. I think third places are really places where you don't necessarily know who's going to walk through the door. But if you walk through the door 4 times, by the 4th time you walk through the door, we're going to start nodding at each other. And we're going to start exploring why it is we keep showing up. Yeah. And hopefully we're going to build a relationship out of that. And it's interesting because, again, this building, if you recognize it from the outside, feels like a fortress. But we're trying to figure out, like, what does it mean to flip it? And what would it look like if folks who have lived on this street for 65 years, our facilities manager worked in this building when he was 15. Yes. What would it look like if those folks start to interact with Jews in Baltimore for whom either right now there's not a lot of Jewish life outside of a couple congregations in Baltimore City, or who live in Remington or choosing to live in the city, and they're looking for people that they share values with. And we're hoping that when they come into this place, they're going to find other people who are, I'm here for the intellectual curiosity. I'm here for the kick-ass concert that's going to happen in this like amazing sanctuary that I hope every musician's going to want to play in. Absolutely. Or I'm here to mark Jewish time and other time that matters to me. And when I come to market, I'm going to find other people that it matters to similarly, and hopefully like build relationships with them, not just community that kind of unfolds in this space specifically, but then you go grab a beer with or go out to dinner with or meet in the park afterwards.
That's like the essence. So basically what's happening here is we are giving you all our relationship in a nutshell, right? That's kind of how we share space, right? I've heard some challenges. You also used to be my supervisor before, right? A lot of people don't know that. When you were my supervisor, I got the chance to see you in a different light.
I wasn't really your supervisor. Well, we worked at the same organization.
We worked at the same space, but you shared supervisory space with me, right? And my understanding, I got a chance to see you in a leadership space then. And for me, that was really kind of key because you lead how you just actually are. That's kind of dope as a leader, right? When I was in the United States Army, my soldiers used to tell me like, the reason why they like me is because, yeah, I'm hard on you, but that's because that's the standard. But when we achieve the standard, right, they like understand that it's just maintenance, right? And I lead how I really am. So for that, I really like to say thank you, right? But that's kind of what's going into here at Third Space, right? It's just your energy that you bring it in. I understand the conversations that you like to have, right? They most of the time that I've ever been part of it been rich and like deep, and it's not, and they don't go to yelling and screaming, right? People may have,
although I'm loud, it's like people might think I'm yelling, but it's just my voice is really loud.
I mean, people may have a different view, right? But the opportunity to kind of engage and kind of get their view off their chest, right? And then having open conversation, open dialogue. I think that's what's led to the community that you built being so strong from a person from the outside looking in first, and then a person that's part of your community. That's kind of what I can see, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that are interesting to reflect on. One is, you know this about me, like I didn't become a rabbi to be in a traditional rabbinic role. And I, for a while, thought about not becoming a rabbi because I knew I was going to be a disruptor from the beginning in some ways. But I've always sort of felt like it wasn't that disruptive. It was sort of like a back to the basics, you know. I'm not sure that anybody would have had me in their Beit Midrash in the early years of the rabbis, but I'd like to think I would have been a really great student in them. And now we're going to just build one that I can be part of and you can be part of too. But one of the things that I've always really been challenged by that actually I think is really like Christian influence, like we live in a kind of Christian hegemonic country and there's a lot of like influence of Protestantism, and all those things are great, but sometimes I think that we've adopted this idea that our rabbis are like our messengers and our intermediaries between us and the divine, and that's like not the way it is at all. And like it and I always really wanted to sort of reset or challenge that notion. One is I don't want to have to dress a certain way. Like, I just, like, don't believe that I can pray better when I'm uncomfortable. And I have definitely walked into synagogues where I've gotten looked at because I'm wearing my Jordans. And I'm like, you're wearing 6-inch stilettos and you're not comfortable. But I'm, like, grounded to pray. But fine. Let's not worry about our shoes. But like, also, like, collapsing. Like, you know, the Jewish story is there was a temple that stood in Jerusalem, 2 of them actually millennia ago. Yes. That's another conversation, another time. And then when it was destroyed, so was this whole mechanism of worship by which the priests mediated between the people of Israel and God. And then when the temple was destroyed, like, Rabbinic Judaism, which is the Judaism that most people recognize. Do you keep kosher? Do you observe Shabbat? Absolutely. How do you celebrate Pesach and Passover? It was about individuals in their personal relationship with the divine.
Absolutely.
And the thing that I've explored for most of my adult life, which has always sort of been in this role of like rabbi, teacher, or in pursuit of that, has been a lot of folks who feel inferior. I'm a bad Jew. I love being Jewish, but I don't know enough. Yeah. And that inferiority sometimes leads to feelings of inadequacy or shame. And by the way, like, those are total obstructions between following like a spiritual journey and following a learning journey. And the truth of the matter is like, it even says in the Talmud, in the rabbinic dialogue, like, teach your tongue to say, I don't know. Like, I just think there's so much that's beautiful in Jewish tradition that we really have to swim upstream to grab, because it's so nuts to people when you're like, Judaism cares more about the question than the answer.
Absolutely.
By the way, like, there's never been one right way to keep kosher. So, like, it's cool if your rabbi tells you this is how we do it, but it's false if they told you this is the only way to do it or the only way it's ever been done. And then I feel like I became a rabbi to have a title and some degree of authority in the circles where people recognize the authority of my ordination, to say, like, it doesn't have to be that way.
I dig that.
The biggest piece is, like...
It's like advocacy right there.
Well, yeah, except that, like... Well, it's funny you say that, because I've always considered myself a community organizer, which, like, mobilizes and builds coalition for systemic change, but I I mean, I show up for things that are political, but mostly I've been trying to do that sort of disruption work in the Jewish world because in a lot of places, the trajectory of American Judaism, definitely since World War II, has been like, it has sort of fallen into this tendency of like consumer America. It's in a lot of ways, and like in the synagogue that inspired to me become a rabbi. This is no diss to synagogues.
Right.
Like the prayer books. A lot of places, like you're sort of waiting for someone to tell you what to do, and either the language is a barrier, or like the questions that are being asked of you are being posed, but then not dove it into. Like we have to activate people. Like you want like the commandment to like in every generation you shall make known my greatness is to like interact with that which you've inherited.
Absolutely. To
wrestle with it, to ask the same questions that are timeless in every generation, and to consult the answers from previous generations, and then to contribute your new ideas. And I just have felt like my role as a teacher of the tradition is to be like, no, you have to like engage with it. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you like 3 different ideas that people have suggested of what you might do, and then I'm going to ask you like,
what are you doing?
Yeah, and what's your parameters for making those decisions?
I could dig that.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up as a young Baptist kid, right? Growing up in Chicago. And my great granddad used to just kind of lead with the scripture, right? Like, I learned how to relate to the scripture because he was who he was, right? He was a deacon in the church, but it was something about him, right? Like, that's the person who, when I tell people I love you and there's nothing you can do about it, this is the dude that I got it from. I feel like he was like the greatest dude to ever live, right? But what he gave me was something that was intangible, right? It was the love of scripture and how to find the divine in everybody, right? How to just be able to look at somebody and say, you know what? You got the Lord on you, and I just need the help if that's what you need, right? Or to just be there for the space for people, right? So when I came into the idea of Judaism, even when I told you, like, that's one of the things that was kind of my barrier to Judaism was when I told people how I came into the understanding of Judaism, right? By way of the Hebrew Israelites, everybody's like, what? Right? But you was one of the only people who was like, lean in, say more about that, like, right? And then when I told you, my favorite parsha is Parshat Bo, where they introduced the mixed multitude, right? And like, I couldn't understand. I couldn't like make it come together why somebody was saying some people could not have some, right? I recently found out I was autistic, so that's probably why I was so like rigid in my thought. But that's a real thing, right? And you gave me the opportunity to like say it out loud, right, in a space that was not black, right? And it was still accepted as my devar, right, or my Torah, my story, and we just kind of grew from there. But that's what led me into the understanding of Judaism. When I got to Jewish Baltimore, I was embraced like the divine had sent me here, and I was supposed to do something cool, right? And that's what I feel like I've been running into the entire time. And I really met you during my first like 4 months of being in Jewish Baltimore. Wow, dude, that was so long ago. That was a while ago, guy. That was wild.
You know, it's interesting that you said, you know, like, I saw myself in the tradition. I like, one, you both are acknowledging that there were portals that were opened up for you that invited you to imagine yourself as part of it. But, I mean, maybe this conversation and our kicking and kibbitzing is going to result, it's definitely going to result in me sometimes, hopefully not getting myself into trouble by lending my critiques to things that I'm like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. But, you know, I grew up in Northern Virginia. I went to Hebrew school two nights a week. You can't teach that much supplementary Jewish education. Assume that my parents were, like, not going through the McDonald's drive-thru on the way home from Hebrew school. Like, supposed to supplement what you're getting at home. My parents gave me a very strong foundation for my identity as a Jew that was not inherently religious and was not inherently learned. I got all of that, and I give them and my hometown synagogue from growing up credit for sort of planting a seed that would sprout into something that like I've clearly like continued to follow along. But I felt like a lot of that Jewish education was like teaching you how to do Jewish in a Jewish moment in a Jewish place. But I feel like the hypothesis of Torah is that it's timeless and there's Torah for everything. So like we should be able to talk about the current reality of like growing racism and anti-Semitism and all the isms that are separating people. And there should be somebody or multiple people in a space that say there's Torah for that.
Absolutely.
Like we can have these conversations and we can consult our tradition that maybe didn't have the language that we did to be able to talk about it, which by the way, speaking about language, sometimes it's much easier to like go back into the conversation that the rabbis were having in the 600s.
Absolutely.
Because any word I use to talk about the conversation that's happening right now is going to signal some sort of meaning that someone's going to assume
Absolutely.
they know what I'm
It's gonna trigger
saying when like I'm not saying it. Now, it's true there are some debates that can't be settled, like the fact that you claim Baltimore, but I know you're wearing that shirt and you're really a Cubs fan more than an Orioles fan. But, you know, again, we will sort of distinguish over time the discussions and debates that for the sake of heaven and those that are not. But, you know.
Absolutely. This is going to be so fun, though. Like, I'm just happy that we are going to bring the people something that they can kind of ingest when they are not in the actual physical space of third space, right? Something to come to, right? Something to come back to, just to maybe it'll spark a conversation between them and their friends, right? Maybe the opportunity for somebody to kind of watch something that we're doing, watch the podcast, watch Kick It and Kibbitz, and just kind of say, you know what? They talked about this, and how do you feel about that, right? Mm-hmm. Like maybe it'll open up those Haruta pairs, right? Those learning groups, right? That's what I see happening, and I feel privileged again to be part of that. I talk a lot anyway, so like having a space where I could just not have to be quiet is.
I mean, that's why you start a radio show or a podcast, because like people can turn it off; they don't want to hear us talk. But we like hearing each other talk. That we're entertained. I mean, that's another upstream part of this, right? Because we live in a time where, you know, folks are like, you want me to get up and show up, and you know, when you say like, hopefully people like. I can see a lot of people, and in the last year when we've been like meeting folks, especially neighbors in the neighborhood, and I'm like, I want you to see this as a place for you. Like,
yes,
people kind of want to like call your BS. They're like, okay, that's great, but like, do you really mean it?
Yeah.
And so like when I think about who shows up at third space, and I've said this to you plenty of times, like sometimes, and in a community like ours where there's often sort of like a dominant mainstream narrative, in this case like in the Jewish community, we tend to tell stories about people who then we posit on the periphery. Queer Jews, Jews who have chosen Judaism rather than born into Judaism, Black Jews, whatever. But my experience spending like the last 12 years as a rabbi in Baltimore on the periphery is nobody's peripheral to their own experience. So it's also very possible that like, you know, somebody might see what we're talking about in this medium and maybe at least feel a little bit more confident I could walk into that program.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, that event looks really interesting, but do they really mean that I'm going to show up and be welcome there? And I know, like, you and I have been talking about, like, you're in West Baltimore. Is it safe there? And we've been talking about, like, this place has a philosophy of safety and belonging, under which security is one of those pieces. But also, like, you're like OG third space. You should never be stopped at the door to walk in here and be like, are you supposed to be here? You'd be like, supposed to be here. I'll tell you where the bathrooms are, you know? So I think that like, that's also my hope in a time where we sometimes feel satisfied, but I would still argue in a two-dimensional manner by like online community and tapping in, sometimes receiving information where we don't have to interact and we can be passive. Absolutely. That is also an invitation to show up in the space where like, we are going to engage with you and we are going to invite you to like show up and to lean in, but that's because we want your voice and we want your perspective.
Absolutely. And like most people who know me in Jewish Baltimore know I don't believe in othering, right? Like that's the one thing that like always get into my skin. I don't like for people to go anywhere and feel like they don't belong, because just from a scriptural standpoint, right? If the divine made breath for you to breathe, well, for people to breathe, right? You should be able to go there and breathe because the divine equipped you with the breath, right? And that's your connection to the divine. So, definitely, if you feel, if anybody was to feel like if they were to question where they were going to be accepted here at Third Space, you absolutely going to be welcome here, because the folks that kind of hang around here, they love people. Mm-hmm. You dig? And like that's what brings people to the spaces, when they understand that love is there.
I think the most important thing though is like, you know, not to be Pollyannic in sort of our commitments to say like, yeah, we're gonna kick it and kibbitz, but we're also gonna like talk about stuff that we too often feel like either is too hard to talk about, or we're ill-equipped to talk about. But what I really want to say is, my experience as a rabbi for the last 12 years is that there's a lot of people out there who want to participate in conversations, but they don't show up because they feel like they don't know enough. They're not competent enough in their knowledge, and they're not confident enough that their voice has a place in this space. So yeah, there are going to be things that we're like, yeah, we're not going to talk about these things. But the one thing I feel really committed to as the sort of like leader of activating this space is we really want to protect the heart of what the Beit Midrash is supposed to be, which is a place where you sort of learn how to think. Absolutely. And you learn how to articulate what your opinion is based on an investigation and an exploration with voices from the past and the other voices who are around that are showing up to say, I'm interested in this conversation too. Absolutely. And we're going to protect that, you know? So I talk a lot with our funder that has really enabled us to get this thing started. And we sometimes joke, we're not here to polemicize, politicize, or dogmatize, right? And
how about that?
That means that, like, you know, if somebody calls me and they're like, Jesse, I don't think you should do this program because it's going to like make X, Y, or Z person uncomfortable, I'm going to say that person, well, call me when you see the program where that like other person's going to say it makes me uncomfortable. Like I think that one of the things we really need more of Jewishly and just broader like civically in this time is to say like, there are folks who have these extreme opinions and I shall not be moved. But there's a lot of people that are just like, I'm just trying to figure out a place to process, to think, and to like practice my ideas without like getting canceled if I misstep or if I change my mind later. And so, you know, in order to do that, we're going to have at times think about like what is off limits. But I think you're right. I think that like the tradition of the Beit Midrash gives us so much to work with. And it's not just the Beit Midrash, like the presentation of films, the presentation of music, the storytelling is going to give us insight into what is timeless about Jewish wisdom and tradition in order to apply it and think about what is timely for right now. I'm going to tell you a story real quick, and then we can sort of think about, like, let's not give it all to them in our first conversation.
Man. Absolutely.
I had the opportunity to teach in February at Lair House, which is a Jewish tavern for learning in Boston. They're opening one in DC next year. It's gonna be awesome. We'll have a field trip for sure. And I taught about the rules for debate and argument based on conversations and rabbis from like 1,000+ years ago. But we were really talking about like what should be the terms for debating today when we are living in a time where like arguments get so heated so quickly and we're inclined to either not have them or just engage with the people who are going to already say, yes, I agree with you.
Silos.
And sometimes I feel like the gift of consulting your ancestral wisdom is you can be like, well, we're not talking about 2024 in America. We are talking about 600 in Babylonia.
Absolutely.
But we are then inspired to think about the wisdom of then applied to the times of now. And I don't think it's a cop-out, but sometimes it feels like a safer entry into, hey, let's debate the hottest topic of right now. And by the way, I've already made up my mind, so I'm not really even going to listen to your argument.
Well, I mean, you know me, I identify ethnically as an American descendant of slavery, right? So a lot of the time when I converse with people about things, especially nowadays, the first thing people go to is like color and race, and I got to slow you down because I don't want to. We got to slow down. Because some things I may say, you may take offense to it, and you may not know that you're going to take offense to the things that I'm going to say. And just because I'm black don't mean, right, that I'm going to agree with everything that has been made for the blacks, right? Like, so I definitely agree with the understanding, the way you just put it. This is going to be dope. This is going to be a really, 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 really activated, that's what they say in nonprofit when the space get when people start moving through it and all of this cool stuff start happening, they say it's an activated space. This space has been activated. So we gonna activate. We have activated third space, and it's just gonna continue to be more and more active. But I'm blessed to be a part of it. Like you all just really people. I think you all just don't know. It's just you all will know. You just don't know yet.
Yeah. One of the things I'm really excited about is like we have activated this space, but like the website's coming in a few weeks, and so is our fall program calendar, and so is all the previews of all the awesome things where you can come here. There will be things where you can sort of lean in from the jump, where you can just show up and, you know, maybe you'll introduce yourself or maybe not, and can kind of like hug the wall if you don't, you know, want to jump in the deep end too quickly. But I'm just so excited about, you know, everybody's like, what are you going to do there? Absolutely. And when you're trying to create sort of like a little bit of a new corner of a market where people are like, so you're not a synagogue and you're not a JCC and you're not just like the local like Y, you know, or
it's not a Chabad.
Yeah, or a music venue, like, you know, like all these people are like your would-be competitors, and I'm like, well, if we're successful, we're like splashing in a new market, which means you can't use old language to describe new things, and also like you kind of got to come and see it for yourself.
That's it.
And people really want to know like when can I come and see it and what are you offering? So I'm just really excited that by the time we record this next month, hopefully all of that information will be out in the world.
It will be out in the world because we putting it into the atmosphere, the energy up. That's what's gonna happen.
Which, you know, they say, Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam, like the Blessed One spoke, and the whole world was created from words. So, you know, people who like to talk a lot, hopefully some of it sticks and creates something generative. Dude.
But this is great. This is what I thought it would be, right? I can't wait to start giving these folks some music, right? I can't wait for them to see the programming that's coming at Third Space. I can't wait for them to just be part of the family, right?
The mishpacha.
The mishpacha. She knew what I was gonna say. She saw it in my eyes, right? But this is where it's at, and this is I believe the beginning of something incredible.
Well, I think we have officially kicked it in Kibbitz.
Absolutely. So, y'all stay tuned. Coming with more. Have at it. Kick It and Kibbitz. Sean and Rabbi Jessy. That'll be cool. Peace.